Welcome to the ZULU ALPHA. Chapter 1. Corporal Sarah Chin, one of the best sniper element in her squad. Sergeant Fred Castro, a heavy hitter. M16 Specialist Captain Jake Moss, C4 and Drone Specialist, Private First Class Akira Chibi hand-to-hand, Combat Specialist, Private First Class ZULU, Close Quarter Short Range Rifle Combat Specialist. All this. 6 people are from different departments. When things went ape shit. They haven't came together yet. Then they form a ragtag team to gun down all the people who just turned so feral and started to eat other people's flesh. The first scream broke across the street like a bad radio transmission, sharp, wet, and cut short. Corporal Sarah Chin dropped behind the burned-out patrol car and brought her sniper rifle up, scanning through the cracked scope. "Movement, 12 o'clock, multiple contacts," she called. Shapes pushed through the smoke in staggered lines, too many to count, advancing from the intersection with broken limbs and blood-black mouths. They did not move like civilians. They moved like a wave. Sarah marked the closest target, controlled her breathing, and waited for command. "Contact front, establish a firing line." Sergeant Fred Castro shouted, stepping left with his M16 shouldered. He fired in 3-round bursts, cutting down the lead infected before they crossed the wreck line. "Zoo, cover right flank. Akira, watch our 6. Sarah, high-value targets only." Private First Class ZULU moved to the alley mouth, rifle tight to his shoulder, sweeping the close quarters with disciplined shots. Captain Jake Moss stayed low behind the delivery truck, launching his recon drone overhead. Its small red light blinked through the smoke as he checked the street grid and slapped a block of C4 against the truck's frame. "Drone shows 30-plus contacts and more pushing in from the east," Jake reported. "We're getting boxed in." Fred's magazine ran dry. "Reloading," he yelled, dropping behind the patrol car as Akira stepped into the gap. A feral vaulted over the hood, jaws snapping, and Akira met it with a hard rifle strike to the throat before driving an elbow into its skull. 2 more came over the wreck. Zoo pivoted and cut one down at point-blank range, while Sarah fired once from behind cover, putting a round through the second one's eye socket. "Fred, up," Sarah called. Fred slammed in a fresh magazine, racked the bolt, and came back online. "Shift left, controlled fire," he ordered. The squad moved as one, falling back by pairs, one firing while the other reloaded, boots scraping over glass as the horde kept pressing closer. "C4 set," Jake called. "Fall back to alley, 20 meters. Fred pointed 2 fingers toward the alley. "Bound back, Sarah and Zoo cover." Sarah and Zoo fired downrange while Fred, Jake, and Akira broke contact and moved to the alley entrance, and then they switched. "Moving," Sarah shouted, sprinting backward as Zoo kept his rifle barking beside her. The horde folded around the delivery truck, bodies packed tight against metal. Jake raised the detonator. "Fire in the hole!" The explosion ripped through the street in a hard orange flash, throwing infected across the pavement and collapsing one side of the truck. Smoke rolled through the alley like a wall. For 3 seconds, nobody spoke. Then the drone feed crackled and Jake's face went pale. "New contact," he said. "Big heat signature, moving fast from the city center." A deep roar answered from beyond the smoke, heavy enough to shake dust from the brick walls. Fred raised his M16 and stepped back into the firing line. "Squad, weapons up," he said. "We are not done." First Lieutenant Danny Johnson came out of the smoke with his sidearm raised, eyes locked on the burning street ahead. "What the hell are those things?" he shouted over the ringing aftermath of the blast. "They look like civilians, but those eyes aren't human anymore. What the hell's going on?" His voice cracked on the last word, but his weapon stayed steady, trained on the figures dragging themselves through the fire. Fred swung his rifle toward Danny for half a second, and before recognizing the uniform and forcing the muzzle down. "Friendly, hold fire," he barked. Sarah kept her scope on the burning street, but her jaw tightened when she saw Danny alone. "Lieutenant, where's the rest of your unit?" she asked. Akira dragged him behind the patrol car by the shoulder strap before he could answer, keeping her body between him and the alley mouth. Zoo never took his eyes off the smoke. "Sir, if you have answers, now is the time," he said. Jake glanced from the drone controller to Danny, his voice low and hard. "Because whatever is coming, it just changed direction toward us?" Danny swallowed hard. eyes flicking from Fred's rifle to the smoke-choked street. "My unit is gone," he said. "We were holding the checkpoint 3 blocks east. 22 soldiers, 2 Humvees, and enough ammo to lock down the avenue. At first we thought it was a riot. Civilians were running at us covered in blood, screaming for help, begging us not to shoot. Then they hit the barricade." He looked down at his hands like he expected to find them shaking. They weren't just infected, they were coordinated. They pulled men off the line, dragged them under the wire, and waited until we broke formation. Staff Sergeant Miller ordered warning shots. Didn't matter. Center mass didn't put them down. We had to aim for the head, and by the time we figured that out, half the platoon was already inside the kill zone. Danny's voice dropped. Then something came through the buildings, not one of the regular ones, bigger, smarter. It stayed behind the herd and drove them forward, like it knew what our guns could do. It hit the lead Humvee so hard it flipped the whole vehicle onto its side. After that, the radio went dead. Screaming on every channel, then nothing. Fred stared at him for a beat, then looked toward the roar beyond the smoke. "You led it here?" Danny shook his head. "No, Sergeant. It was already hunting. I just survived long enough to warn somebody." Jake's drone controller gave another sharp crackle, and a red warning icon flashed across the screen. "Contact closing," Jake said. 30 seconds, maybe less. Sarah settled back behind her rifle, her voice cold and steady. "Then we stand, or we die running." Fred gave a short, broken laugh, the kind a man made when fear had nowhere else to go. "Negative. We find a safe place first, refit if we can, then assess the situation," he said, forcing his voice back into command. "Because this is Zulu Alpha. That means the dead are eating the living. Command is probably a smoking hole, and if God is still listening, he has gone radio silent." His smile cut across his face for half a second and died there. "So congratulations, people. We made history. Worst day of it." Another roar rolled through the street, and Fred raised his M16 with hands that were steady only because they had to be. No one laughed at first. Zoo only muttered, "Hell of a briefing, Sergeant," while checking the chamber on his rifle. Akira wiped black blood from her sleeve and gave Fred a thin, humorless smile. "Next time, maybe lead with the part where God stopped answering." Sarah kept her eye behind the scope, but her finger tightened along the trigger guard. "Jokes later, targets now." Danny looked from one face to the next and realized the joke had done exactly what Fred meant it to do. It kept them breathing for one more second. Then the roar came again, closer this time, and whatever comfort was left in the squad died with it. "Okay, people, let's move," Danny said, forcing a crooked smile as another tremor rolled through the street. "First priority is finding a safe place, or at least some high ground. Then we refit and figure out what fresh nightmare we just enlisted in, so who's leading?" Zoo glanced at him without lowering his rifle. "LT's got jokes," he said. "That's either brave or a head injury." From that moment on, the 6 of them stopped being survivors from different units and became something closer to a team. They moved hard and quiet through the dead streets until they found a place that looked safe enough for the moment. The upper floor of an old municipal building with steel doors, narrow stairwells, and a clear view of the streets below. It was not perfect, but it gave them walls, height, and time. They barricaded the entrances and checked every room twice. "Clear left," Akira called from the hall. "Clear right," Zoo answered, sweeping his rifle across an empty office. Fred kicked a busted chair against the stairwell door and nodded. "Good enough to die in, good enough to rest in." Sarah gave him a look over her scope. "That your official safety rating, Sergeant?" Fred shrugged. "Best one left." Weapons were cleaned, magazines were reloaded, wounds were wrapped, and packs were stripped down and reorganized. Jake laid the drone on a desk and pried open its casing with a multi-tool. "Rotor 2 is cracked, batteries cooked, and the camera feed looks like it got dragged through hell." Zoo slid a fresh magazine into his rifle and smirked. "So it fits in with the rest of us." Danny sat against the wall while Akira tightened a bandage around his forearm. He hissed through his teeth. "You Army medics always this gentle?" Akira pulled the knot tight. "Only with officers." Fred counted ammunition into neat rows on the floor. "Save complaints for after we know whether we have enough rounds to survive breakfast." They found running water that coughed brown at first, then cleared enough for quick showers taken one at a time while the others stood guard. When chow came, it was cold rations eaten from torn packets around a busted conference table. For a while, no one spoke except to ask for ammo, gauze, or water. Then Zoo lifted a pouch of mystery meat and frowned. If the zombies don't get us, this will. Sarah took a bite without looking up. Eat it. If you complain loud enough, they might come season it. Danny almost laughed, then stopped himself when another distant scream echoed somewhere below. Fred chewed slowly and stared at the covered windows. That right there is why we chew quiet. After chow, the room settled into a silence heavier than the barricades. The food had put something warm in their stomachs, but it did nothing for the hollow look in their eyes. Sarah sat with her rifle across her knees, cleaning the scope lens even after it was already clear, because stopping meant thinking about every face she had seen through it. Fred tried to keep his usual hard expression, but his shoulders sagged when no one was looking, the weight of command pressing down harder than his body armor. Jake stared at the damaged drone parts spread across the table like they were pieces of a puzzle that might still save them. Akira flexed her bruised hands and said nothing, her mind still back in the street with the dead snapping inches from her face. Zoo kept joking under his breath, but each joke came out quieter than the last. Danny watched them all and felt the loss of his old unit sitting in his chest like a stone. None of them said they were scared. They did not have to. Fear was in the way they checked their weapons, in the way they listened to the walls, and in the way they had begun to sit close enough to cover one another if the doors failed. When they were refitted and steady enough to think, Jake and Danny set up the radio near the window, running wire toward the roof for a stronger signal. Static hissed through the speaker. Danny keyed the mic. Any surviving military units, this is First Lieutenant Danny Johnson, broadcasting from Emergency Shelter Grid, unknown. Situation is Zulu Alpha. Say again, Zulu Alpha. Respond if you copy. Nothing answered but static. Jake adjusted the frequency. Try civilian emergency bands. Fred leaned over the table, his voice low. Anybody out there still breathing gets the same message. Stay high, stay quiet, and aim for the head. Sarah looked toward the black windows. And if they answer, Akira checked the magazine in her rifle. Then we find out if we're a rescue team or the last ones left. Chapter 2. The radio crackled, then cleared with a burst of sharp static. A woman's voice came through, thin but alive. This is the CDC Emergency Response Agency. Is anyone out there? Repeat, is anyone receiving this transmission? Jake froze with one hand on the dial. Danny leaned closer to the speaker, his face lighting up for the first time since the checkpoint fell. For hours, they had started to believe they were the last people left alive. Now, somewhere beyond the dead city and the burning streets, someone was still broadcasting. Danny snatched the handset so fast the cord snapped tight. CDC Emergency Response, this is First Lieutenant Danny Johnson, United States Army. We rid you, loud and clear, he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. Jake leaned over his shoulder and adjusted the gain. Tell him location, head count, and condition, he whispered. Danny nodded. We are 6 survivors sheltered in an upper-floor municipal building, exact grid unknown. We have limited ammunition, 1 damaged recon drone, basic medical supplies, and multiple hostile infected in the area. Be advised, these are not standard casualties. They are aggressive, coordinated, and only stop with cranial trauma. Jake took the handset next, his eyes flicking to the repaired drone monitor. This is Captain Jake Moss. We also have confirmation of a larger hostile contact operating with the infected, he said. Thermal signature is oversized, fast, and appears to influence herd movement. It wiped out an Army checkpoint 3 blocks east and chased survivors into our sector. He paused as the radio hissed between words. If you have a safe zone, extraction point, or standing orders, we need them now. And if this is being recorded, label this field report Zulu Alpha. Repeat, Zulu Alpha is real. For a moment, the channel answered with nothing but static. Then the woman came back, clipped and controlled, though fear bled through the edges of her voice. Captain Moss, Lieutenant Johnson, this is Dr. Helen Reeves, CDC Emergency Response. We copy 6 survivors, limited supplies, hostile infected. and possible Alpha-class organism in your sector. Papers rustled on the other end. Listen carefully. Do not engage the larger contact unless absolutely necessary. Do not allow it to close distance. If it is directing herd behavior, then it is not just infected. It is coordinating them. Danny tightened his grip on the handset. No, Doctor, do you have a safe zone? The response came fast. Temporary evacuation site established at Fairview Medical Research Annex. 12 miles north of your estimated location. It has power, armed security, and decontamination capability. But we cannot confirm how long it will hold. Roads are compromised. Air evacuation is grounded until we regain radar control. The radio popped, then cleared again. Your best route is rooftops and service corridors. Stay above street level whenever possible. Avoid hospitals, shelters, and police stations. They became feeding grounds within the first 6 hours. Jake looked up from the radio, his hope thinning into something colder. What about command? He asked. Dr. Reeves did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was lower. Command is fragmented. Some units are still active, but do not trust open military frequencies. We have confirmed false broadcasts using familiar call signs to draw survivors into the open. Fred's face hardened. Sarah lifted her rifle toward the covered window. Reeves continued it. If you have a drone, use it. If you have explosives, save them. And if you hear the infected stop moving all at once, leave immediately. That usually means the Alpha has arrived. The room went still after Reeves's warning. Hope had entered with the first clear voice on the radio, but now it sat in the room beside fear, thin and fragile. Danny lowered the handset slowly, his knuckles pale around the plastic. False broadcasts, he said, more to himself than anyone else. So even the radios can get us killed. Jake stared at the drone monitor, jaw tight, already recalculating routes in his head. Rooftops and service corridors, he said. 12 miles north, that's a long way with a herd below us and an Alpha tracking movement. Fred began loading magazines again, faster this time. Then we do it slow, quiet, and ugly, he said. No hero moves, no open streets. Anybody hears the dead go silent. We move like the building is already on fire. Sarah checked the window slit and gave a short nod. They just gave us a direction. That's more than we had 10 minutes ago. Akira stood and flexed her bruised hands. Direction's good. Living long enough to use it is better. Zoo looked around the room, his usual smirk gone. So the good news is we're not alone, he said. Bad news is everything else. No one corrected him. Jake tapped the drone monitor and then pointed to the map spread across the conference table. Our first objective is supply, he said. Nearest Army or Marine installation, whichever's closer. We get ammunition, MREs, med packs, spare batteries, and charging gear for the drones. Once we're topped off, we move north to Fairview Medical. He looked around the room, his voice hardening. We do not make that 12-mile run half empty, not with an Alpha in play. Preparation started without ceremony. Fred took the map and turned Jake's plan into marching order. Danny, you and Jake plot the route. Sarah, overwatch windows and rooftops. Akira, check exits and stairwells again. Zoo, inventory ammo and blades. Nobody packs what they cannot run with. The room shifted from fear to motion. Packs opened, magazines clicked into place, and every loose item was judged by one question. Would it help them survive the next mile? Sarah broke down her rifle and cleaned it one more time, moving with the quiet patience of someone trying to control the only thing she could. She counted her rounds twice, then split a small handful with Danny without saying a word. Fred checked every M16 magazine by touch, slapping each one against his palm before tucking it into his vest. Akira wrapped her knuckles, tightened the straps on her boots, and tested the edge of a combat knife against her thumb. Zoo laid ammo, water, ration packs, and medical supplies into separate piles, muttering numbers under his breath like a prayer he did not believe in. We're ugly on ammo, he said. Not dead ugly, but ugly, Fred nodded. Then ugly will have to do. Jake coaxed the damaged drone back to life long enough to scan the blocks around them. The feed stuttered, washed in gray and red thermal smears, but it showed rooftops, service ladders, maintenance bridges, and one possible route toward an old reserve depot near the edge of town. We move building to building, Jake said. No street crossings, unless Sarah clears them first. Drone flies short hops to save battery. If the signal cuts, we fall back to hand signals. Danny drew the route in pencil across the map, marking danger zones with hard black X's. If we hit the depot, we resupply fast. No treasure hunting, ammo, food, medical, batteries. Then we vanish. Before they left, the 6 of them stood in the dark room with their gear tight, weapons loaded, and faces set in the tired silence of people who understood the odds. No one gave a speech. No one needed one. Danny checked the radio one last time and clipped it to his vest. Jake folded the map and sealed it inside a plastic sleeve. Sarah moved to the door first, rifle angled low. Akira took the rear with Zoo beside her, both listening for movement in the stairwell. Fred looked over the team once, counting them the way a sergeant counted ammunition because every life mattered now. Then he lifted 2 fingers and pointed toward the exit. The mission had changed from surviving the room to surviving the road. Before they stepped into the stairwell, Jake paused with one hand on the door and looked back at the others. "Before we go out there," he said, "this little disaster of a fire team needs a name. Team Ghost, Team Rapture, maybe Team Wolfpack." Sue lowered his rifle just enough to give him a stare that could fail a safety inspection. "Wolfpack? Sir, with respect, that sounds like something stenciled on a private's truck right before he misses child support." Sarah adjusted her scope without looking up. "Also denied. None of you have the discipline, dental work, or hygiene standards to represent wolves." Fred checked his magazine and grunted. "Call sign needs to be short, clear, and not make me want to shoot the radio. I am not screaming Wolfpack Actual while getting chased by meat tornadoes." Danny gave a tired nod. "Agreed. If anybody from command is still alive, I'd like our final transmission to sound less like a paintball team." Akira gave a short laugh and shook her head. "What about Team Zulu?" she said. "That's what we're fighting now, and it sounds less like Jake lost a naming contest in the barracks." Jake pointed at her. "That contest was never legally recognized because you named 3 plans Operation Thunder Snacks," Sarah said. For a moment the others were quiet. Then Fred nodded once. "Zulu works. One word. Clean on comms. Hard to screw up unless Zoo answers every time we say it." Zoo raised one hand. "For the record, Sergeant, if someone yells Zulu under fire, I am assuming I'm famous and responding accordingly." Sarah gave the smallest smile. "Congratulations, Private. Your entire career has led to being a communications hazard." Danny looked toward the stairwell. Still better than Team Thunder Snacks. Jake pushed the door open a crack, listening to the dead below. "Team Zulu it is. Nobody writes that other thing down." Zoo tapped his rifle against his shoulder. "Fine. But if we survive, I want a patch with a skull, crossed rifles, and absolutely no wolves. Maybe one tiny snack." "Denied," Fred said. "Morale issue," Zoo argued. "Everything about you is a morale issue," Sarah replied. Somehow, even with the dead below them and an Alpha somewhere in the city, the name sounded right. Chapter 3. Team Zulu finally left the municipal building just before dawn, slipping into the pale gray light with their packs tight, weapons ready, and Fairview Medical waiting 12 dangerous miles north. They did not take the streets unless they had no choice. Jake's drone led them in short, nervous hops while Sarah swept windows and rooftops through her scope. The 6 of them crossed from roof to roof, climbed fire escapes, moved along maintenance ladders, and took every scrap of high ground the dead had not claimed. After 2 miles of slow, miserable movement, their luck finally coughed up something useful. A large Ford F-150 with an extended cab, parked crooked near a service garage with one door hanging open. Zoo stared at it like it had been sent by every exhausted saint in history. "Hot wire, anyone?" he asked. Fred looked at the truck, then at Zoo. "If you're about to say you learned from a cousin, I'm leaving you here." Zoo grinned and slid toward the driver's side. "Relax, Sergeant. It was not a cousin." Sarah narrowed her eyes. That somehow made it worse. Jake scanned the street while Akira covered the garage entrance. "Make it fast. Dead don't respect grand theft auto." A minute later, the engine coughed, screamed, and finally roared to life. Zoo patted the dashboard. "See? Professional." Fred climbed into the passenger seat. "Professional criminals do paperwork too, Private. Drive." With the team packed into the truck and the city waking hungry around them, Team Zulu rolled toward the nearest military facility, chasing supplies before they could chase answers. They reached the nearest military facility just after sunrise, Joint Base McCord, Fort Lewis. The Ford F-150 rolled to a stop at the main gate, its engine rumbling too loud in the empty morning. No welcome committee waited for them, no guards challenged them, no floodlights snapped on. The whole base sat quiet, too quiet for a place that should have been crawling with soldiers. Danny leaned forward from the back seat, staring through the windshield. A base this size doesn't just go quiet. Fred kept his eyes on the empty guard post. It does if everyone inside is dead, missing, or worse. Zoo shifted in the driver's seat. I vote missing. Missing sounds friendlier. Sarah snorted from the truck bed. Nothing about this place is friendly. Akira climbed down first, moved to the chained gate, and looked back at Fred. Permission to open the front door. Fred gave one sharp nod. Try not to announce us to the whole county. She wrapped both hands around the chain, braced her boots against the concrete, and snapped the lock loose with a hard metallic crack. Subtle, Zoo whispered. Akira pushed the gate open just wide enough for the truck. You wanted fast. Zoo leaned out the window and raised a hand. For the record, I could have picked that lock. Akira looked at the broken chain dangling from her fist. With what, your charm? My charm has opened many doors. That explains why most of them were trying to close again. Sarah gave a quiet snort from the truck bed. Jake looked up from the drone controller. Fast is good, quiet would have been better. Akira pointed at the broken chain. Then you do it next time with your feelings. Zoo tapped the steering wheel. Careful. My feelings have excellent upper body strength. Akira climbed back toward the truck. Good. Put them on gate duty next time. They drove another mile inside the base, passing empty checkpoints, abandoned transport vehicles, and barracks with doors left hanging open. Still no one moved. No one shouted. No infected came running. That bothered Sarah more than a firefight would have. This place has teeth, she said, scanning the rooftops through her scope from the truck bed. We just haven't found where they're biting from yet. Jake checked the drone screen, but the signal broke into static the deeper they went. Interference, he muttered, or damage. Danny glanced at him. Which one gets us killed faster? Usually the one I don't identify in time, Jake said. Zoo drove slower, his grin fading as the truck rolled past an overturned Humvee. Anybody else feel like we're driving into somebody's mouth? Sarah kept the rifle steady. Yes. Keep driving. Fred pointed toward a low concrete building ahead. Armory, we go in fast, take what we can carry, and get out before this silence decides to answer back. Akira checked the knife on her vest. And if something is waiting inside? Fred opened his door before the truck fully stopped. Then we answer first. The armory door was locked, but not for long. Jake set a small charge against the frame, shielded the team behind the corner, and blew the latch with a sharp pop instead of a full blast. Zoo coughed through the dust. You call that small? Jake gave him a quick look. You still have eyebrows. That was small. Fred raised a fist, and the team stacked on the door. Sarah, rear watch. Akira, with me. Danny, count the room. Zoo, keep that mouth useful and cover the hall. Best order I've had all day, Zoo muttered. Inside, the smell of oil, dust, and cold metal rolled over them like a blessing. Racks of rifles lined the walls. Ammo cans sat stacked in neat rows. Medical kits, batteries, body armor, and sealed ration crates waited untouched. Danny stepped in slowly, almost refusing to believe it. No blood, no shell casings, nobody cleaned this out. Fred's expression tightened. That means they either left in a hurry or never made it here. Sarah stepped inside, swept her light across the far rack, and froze. Jackpot, she said. Her beam landed on a Barrett .50 caliber rifle resting in its cradle like it had been waiting for her personally. Zoo looked from the rifle to Sarah's face. Should we give you two a minute? Sarah didn't blink. Touch it and I'll break your trigger finger. Jake smiled despite himself. I think she's in love. For the first time all morning, Sarah Chin smiled like the world had done something right. I'm naming her Mercy. Fred grabbed an ammo can and shook his head. Fine. But Mercy rides shotgun only if she helps us live long enough to regret this. With the armory door pulled shut behind them, Fred Castro decided he did not like the silence outside any more than the silence inside. "Hold here," he said, raising 2 fingers. "I'm checking our surroundings." Zoo looked up from stuffing magazines into his vest. "If you find a gift shop, grab me a snow globe." Akira gave him a flat look. "If he finds a gift shop, we are already dead." Fred ignored them, eased the armory door open, and leaned just far enough into the hall to look left. For one frozen second, he saw nothing. Then the shadows moved. Dozens of infected were flooding across the motor pool, crawling over vehicles, dragging themselves through broken windows and turning their heads toward the armory, as if they had heard the whole building breathe. Fred slammed the door shut so fast the frame jumped. He came back to the team at a dead sprint, pale under the grime. "We got trouble," he snapped. "The kind that wants us for breakfast, lunch, and dinner." Zoo blinked at him. "Did you just say lunch or launch?" "Both," Fred said, grabbing another ammo can. "Because if we do not move, they are launching us into the afterlife." The room changed instantly. The jokes died, weapons came up, and every pack was cinched tight. Their supply objective was complete. The armory had given them ammunition, food, medical gear, fresh batteries, and enough firepower to keep moving. Now the primary mission came back like a command burned into their bones. Reached the Fairview Medical CDC outpost. Danny slung a medical bag over one shoulder and checked the radio. "Fairview is still north. If the route is blocked, we cut through the service road and use the base perimeter." Jake shoved drone batteries into his pack. "Drone goes up once we clear the building. I can map us a path, but not if we get eaten in the doorway." Sarah settled the Barrett against her shoulder with a grim little smile. "Then nobody stand in my sight line." Akira cracked her knuckles and moved beside Fred. "How many?" Fred chambered around. "Enough." Zoo swallowed, then forced a grin. "That's my least favorite number." Fred kicked the door open, and Team Zulu punched into the hall like a storm. Sarah fired first, the Barrett thunder echoing so hard dust shook from the ceiling. The lead infected folded backward into 3 more behind it, and the impact bought them half a second of breathing room. Fred used it immediately. "Center line, short burst, do not waste rounds," he shouted. He and Danny moved shoulder to shoulder, rifles barking in controlled rhythm, dropping targets as they spilled from the far doorway. Jake slid behind them, tossed a flash charge down the corridor, and turned his face away. White light burst against the walls, blinding the front of the horde and throwing long, twitching shadows across the armory floor. "Move!" Fred shouted. "Service exit now!" Akira surged left as one infected slammed through a side office door. She met it with a boot to the knee, snapped its leg sideways, then drove her knife up under its jaw before kicking the body back into 2 more climbing over it. Left side clear for about 3 seconds. "I'll take 2, Zoo yelled, firing past her shoulder. Brass rained across the concrete, hot casings skittering under their boots while the infected screamed and clawed over the fallen. To reach them, they fell back by pairs the way Fred had drilled into them only minutes before. Fred fired, Danny reloaded, Danny fired, Fred shifted, Sarah stepped backward, with Mercy braced against her shoulder, every shot from the .50, punching a savage hole through the crowd and turning the hallway into a tunnel of smoke and ringing metal. Jake yanked a smoke canister from his pouch and bounced it off the floor. Gray clouds swallowed the corridor, but the infected kept coming by sound, slamming into lockers and crawling over equipment crates. One smashed through the smoke straight at Danny. He brought his rifle up too late, and the thing's hands hit his chest plate hard enough to knock him into the wall. Fred rammed his shoulder into it, pinned it for one ugly second, and Danny shoved his sidearm under its chin. The shot cracked once. The body dropped between them. Danny sucked in a breath. "I had that." Fred shoved him forward. "Have it faster next time." The horde pressed harder near the service corridor, packed so tight their bodies jammed the doorway. Jake slapped a small charge onto a fallen weapons cabinet and kicked it toward the choke point. "Everybody down!" Fred grabbed Sarah by the vest and pulled her behind a concrete pillar. As the blast flipped the cabinet into the front rank, metal screamed, bodies scattered, and the path opened just wide enough for Team Zulu to move. Akira went first, clearing hands from the doorway with savage, efficient strikes. Zoo followed, covering low until one crawler shot out from under a workbench and clamped both hands around his boot. Bad touch, bad touch, Zoo yelled, hopping backward as another infected snapped its teeth inches from the space between his legs. Akira grabbed the back of his vest and yanked him clear so hard he nearly flew. Her knife came down once, ending the threat. Zoo looked down, then looked at Akira with pure horror. You saved the future of the Koa bloodline. Akira shoved him toward the exit, then stopped presenting it to the enemy. Sarah barked a laugh despite the gunfire. Focus, Romeo. Zoo raised his rifle again, voice higher than usual. I am extremely focused, terrified, but focused. They burst through the service exit into harsh daylight with the horde spilling after them. Jake launched the drone one-handed while running, the small machine winding up over the rooftops. Perimeter Road is open 200 meters east, he shouted, but not for long. Fred pointed with his rifle. Truck, then Fairview. No detours, no hero plays. We have what we came for. Danny grabbed the last ammo can from Zoo and shoved it into the truck bed. CDC outpost is still the objective. If Reeves is alive, she needs to hear what we saw here. Sarah climbed into position with Mercy braced beside her. Then drive like you hate walking. Zoo scrambled into the truck, still checking himself like he expected missing parts. Akira climbed in after him and gave him a sideways glance. Everything still attached? Zoo exhaled. Physically, yes. Spiritually, I need a minute. Fred slammed the passenger door and pointed north. You can recover on the road. Team Zulu, move. The F-150 roared away from the armory as the infected crashed through the fence behind them, and Fairview Medical became the only direction that mattered. As the truck tore away from the armory, the adrenaline began to drain from them, leaving something heavier behind. One by one, they looked back at the bodies scattered across the base, the uniforms, the name tapes, the broken unit patches still clinging to torn sleeves. These had not been strangers. They had been soldiers. Their soldiers. Brothers and sisters in arms who had once stood watch over the same flag, followed orders, shared chow, and believed someone would come if they called for help. Team Zulu had just fought their way through them in the victory that tasted like ash. Sarah lowered Mercy and stared at the floor of the truck bed. Danny gripped the radio so tightly his knuckles went white. Akira wiped her blade clean, but her face had gone still. Even Zoo had no joke ready. Fred looked at each of them, seeing the sadness settle into their eyes like a wound no bandage could touch. They deserve answers, he said quietly, and so do we. No one argued. The mission to Fairview Medical was no longer just about survival. It was about finding out what had happened, who knew it, and whether any part of the world they had sworn to protect could still be saved. Chapter 4. Team Zulu escaped McCord Fort Lewis in the battered F-150 with smoke fading behind them, and only 3 miles left before Fairview Medical. For a while, nobody spoke. The long silence inside the truck felt heavier than the weapons, heavier than the ammo cans, heavier than the memory of the soldiers they had been forced to put down. Captain Jake Moss kept both hands tight on the wheel, eyes flicking between the road and the GPS still glowing on the dash. Then the fuel warning light blinked red. We're running low, he said. If we don't stop soon, we're walking. Up ahead, through the gray morning haze, the sign for a gas station leaned over the road like a broken promise. Jake eased the truck off the street and rolled toward the pumps. As soon as the engine died, the same feeling settled over them, the kind of quiet that did not feel empty, but waiting. Sarah lifted Mercy and scanned the storefront. Fred's grip tightened on his M16. Even Zoo did not make a joke. The place was too still, too clean, too quiet. And by now, Team Zulu knew quiet usually meant something was listening. They moved as quietly as 6 exhausted soldiers could. Jake stayed at the pump with one hand on the nozzle and the other near his sidearm, while the rest of Team Zulu spread out in a loose ring around the truck. Fred watched the road. Keep it tight, he ordered. Nobody drifts, nobody relaxes. Sarah took the storefront with Mercy settled against her shoulder. Windows are dark, she said. That does not make me feel better. Danny covered the alley beside the station. Alley's clear for now. Zoo scanned the rooftops and Akira checked the dead lanes between the abandoned cars. Fernow's doing a lot of work today, Zoo muttered. Akira glanced back. Less talking. More watching. For a few precious seconds, the only sound was fuel rushing into the tank. Jake watched the numbers climb on the pump and breathed through his teeth. Come on, come on. Drink faster. Then Akira's voice cut through the stillness. "And there it is," she said, raising her rifle. "Looks like the Zulus all came out for dinner." "Contact," Fred barked. "Front and left. Weapons free." The horde stepped from behind the gas station in a slow, unnatural wave. Team Zulu opened fire at once, muzzle flashes strobing across the pumps as the infected staggered forward. "Jake, how much fuel?" Danny shouted. "Not enough," Jake yelled back. "Then make it enough faster." Zoo fired over the hood. "I hate gas stations. I officially hate gas stations." But something was wrong. The regular Zulus were not rushing in like before. They were clustered together, packed tight, moving as if an unseen hand had gathered them into formation. Sarah saw it first. "They're being controlled," she shouted. Fred glanced toward the herd. "By what?" Then 2 Alpha Zulus erupted from the mass, towering over the herd, faster and smarter than anything Team Zulu had faced. "Alphas!" Danny yelled. "2 of them!" Sarah swung Mercy toward the nearest one. "I've got left." The first slammed into Sarah before she could fire. The second hit Danny at the same time, ripping him off his feet in a blur of muscle and rage. "Sarah!" Akira screamed. "Danny!" Fred shouted, turning his rifle. Each Alpha clamped one massive hand around a soldier's head and squeezed. Sarah's skull caved in with a wet, cracked brain matter spilling down the Alpha's fingers as blood splashed across Mercy's barrel. Danny's head burst a second later under the other creature's grip, bone and gore spraying against the side of the truck. Fred screamed their names again, but the gunfire and the horde swallowed the sound. "No, no, no," Zoo yelled, firing so fast his rifle climbed. "Put them down," Akira shouted, her voice breaking with rage. The 2 Alpha Zulus bent over the headless bodies, bit into the torn necks, and then ripped Sarah and Danny apart with brutal strength, splitting their bodies in 2 as blood gushed across the pavement. They flung the pieces into the regular horde, scattering arms, legs, and torn gear like fresh meat. The Zulus collapsed on the remains in a feeding frenzy. For a heartbeat, Team Zulu froze, not from fear, but from grief, so sudden it felt like a bullet through the chest. Jake stared at what was left of Sarah and Danny, his face twisting into something raw and furious. "You monsters," he whispered. Then he roared, grabbed the grenade launcher from the truck bed, and shouldered it with shaking hands. "Fall back," Fred shouted, dragging Akira toward the cab. "Move, damn it, we can't save them." Akira fought him for half a second. "They killed them, Fred." "I know," Fred shouted back. "And they'll kill us too if we stay." Zoo fired wildly into the herd. "Jake, anytime you want to do something loud would be great." Jake aimed center mass at the nearest Alpha and pulled the trigger. "This is for Sarah and Danny." The grenade streaked past the creature as it moved, slammed into the fuel pump behind it, and disappeared in a flash of fire. "Down!" Fred yelled. He hauled Jake into the truck as the explosion bloomed across the station. The F-150 lurched forward, tires screaming, flames chasing them onto the road. "Drive!" Akira screamed. Jake jammed the accelerator to the floor. No one spoke for several seconds as they sped away, the fire shrinking behind them. Then Zoo looked back through the rear window, his voice small and broken. They were right there. Fred stared ahead, jaw locked. "Eyes forward." Akira wiped blood from her face with a shaking hand. "We come back for those things." Jake gripped the wheel until his knuckles whitened. "No," he said, his voice low and deadly. "We finish the mission, then we make them pay." Sarah and Danny were gone. The tank was half full, and Team Zulu drove toward Fairview Medical, with rage burning hotter than the fire behind them. The road to Fairview became a blur of firelight, smoke, and grief. Jake drove like the truck was the only thing left in the world that could still obey him, swerving around abandoned cars and jumping curbs when the streets narrowed with wreckage. Behind them, the gas station burned in a tall orange column, and the shockwave rolled after the F-150 hard enough to rattle loose brass across the floorboards. Fred twisted in the passenger seat with his M16 braced against the window, watching for shapes in the flames. "Anything following?" Jake asked without looking over. Fred kept his jaw locked. "Not yet." Akira sat in the back with blood drying across her face, one hand gripping the seat and the other wrapped around her rifle. "Not yet is not good enough." Zeus stared through the rear glass, pale and silent for once. The fire behind them lit the road in flashes, and every flash showed him Sarah's rifle still lying near the pumps, Mercy half buried in smoke. "We left her weapon," he said softly. Fred's voice came back like stone. We left 2 soldiers. Do not make me say it again. The GPS stuttered on the dash, its cracked screen flickering between the main road and a service route that cut behind the shopping center. Only 3 miles remained, but the distance felt impossible. Jake took the service route without slowing down. The F-150 clipped the mirror off a dead delivery van and bounced over a curb, hard enough to slam everyone against their belts. "Roadblock ahead," Akira shouted. A jackknife bus sat across the street, windows black, its doors hanging open. Jake jerked the wheel left and the truck screamed through a narrow gap between the bus and a chain-link fence. Zulus spilled from the bus interiors they passed, arms clawing through broken windows. One grabbed the tailgate and held on, dragging itself up with its jaw snapping. Zoo found his voice again, leaned over the seat and fired twice through the rear window. The glass spider-webbed. The Zulu dropped away under the tires. "Rear window's gone," he said. "You are welcome." Fred did not look back. "Bill us later." A deep roar rolled across the blocks behind them, low and furious, and every survivor in the truck knew it was not from the regular horde. Jake's eyes flicked to the mirror. Something huge moved through the smoke near the gas station, but the flames and distance made it hard to see whether one Alpha had survived or both. "Tell me that was the explosion," Zoo said. Nobody answered. Fred shoved a fresh magazine into his rifle. "Jake, keep moving. Akira, watch left. Zoo, rear. If that thing catches us, aim for the head, the knees, the eyes, anything that slows it down." Akira leaned out the broken rear window and fired at shapes racing between the cars. "They're spreading out," she shouted, "like they know where we're going." Jake pushed the accelerator harder. The fuel gauge climbed only halfway from the rush stop, but the engine roared as if it understood the mission. Fairview Medical was close now. Close enough to die, reaching, close enough to fight for. The city thinned as they reached the medical district. The streets widened and the buildings rose cleaner and colder, their glass faces reflecting a dead sunrise. Far ahead, through the haze, the Fairview Medical Research Annex appeared behind a high-security fence topped with razor wire. Floodlights still burned along the perimeter. For one fragile second, hope moved through the truck. Then red warning strobes flashed over the front gate, and a burst of automatic gunfire cracked from somewhere inside the compound. Jake eased off the gas just enough to keep from plowing straight into the barricade. "That better be security," Zoo said. Fred lifted one hand out the passenger window, palm open, weapon low but ready. "Friendly survivors," he shouted as they closed the distance. "United States Army, do not shoot." A spotlight snapped onto the truck, blinding them. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker, distorted and urgent. "Stop the vehicle. Exit with hands visible. Infected are behind you." Jake slammed the brakes and the F-150 skidded to a stop 20 yards from the gate. Fred threw his door open first, stepping out with his rifle lowered and his hands spread just enough to be seen. Akira and Zoo climbed out behind him, shaking from adrenaline, grief, and rage. The horde began to appear at the far end of the road, pouring around the corner in broken waves. Somewhere behind them, the deeper roar came again. Fred looked toward the gate guards and then back at the dead. "Open the gate," he called, his voice rough. "We lost 2 getting here. We're not losing the rest in your driveway." For 2 awful seconds, nothing happened. Then the gate motor groaned. The barricade split open and security troops waved them through. Team Zulu ran the truck inside as gunfire erupted over their heads, the Fairview defenders cutting into the horde while the gate began to close. As the steel barrier sealed behind them, Jake looked back through the cracked windshield at the road, the flames and the dead pressing against the fence. Sarah and Danny had not made it. But Team Zulu had reached Fairview Medical, and the cost of that victory sat with them like blood that would not wash off. Inside the Fairview gate, the truck rolled another 30 feet and stopped, like it had finally run out of will. For a moment, none of them moved. The engine ticked. Gunfire hammered the fence behind them. Orders shouted from the security teams echoed across the courtyard. But inside the cab, the world had gone muffled and far away. Jake kept both hands locked on the steering wheel, staring through the cracked windshield without blinking. His face was smeared with soot and blood, but the worst damage was in his eyes. He had driven them here. He had kept the mission alive. And he had watched 2 of his people die in the mirror. "We made it," Zoo whispered from the back seat, but the words sounded wrong the instant they left his mouth. Fred was the first to open his door, not because he was ready, but because someone had to. His boots hit the pavement, and he stood there with his rifle hanging low, breathing hard through his nose. Command had always made sense when it was about fields of fire, ammo counts, movement, and cover. It made no sense with Sarah's name still caught in his throat and Danny's blood still drying on the truck. He looked back at Jake, Akira, and Zoo, and forced his voice into the shape of an order. Out. Weapons safe. Let them check us. It sounded calm. It was not. His hands were shaking so badly he had to curl them around the rifle to hide it. Akira climbed out next and nearly stumbled when her boots touched solid ground. A Fairview guard shouted for her to raise her hands, but she barely heard him. She kept seeing the Alpha's fingers close around Sarah's head, kept hearing the wet crack, kept feeling Fred drag her away when every part of her had wanted to run back into the fire and tear the creature apart with her bare hands. Her grief did not come out as tears. Came out as a snarl, as a white-knuckle grip on her rifle, as the way she flinched when a medic reached for her arm. "Do not touch me," she snapped, but then her face twisted and her voice broke lower. "Just give me a target." Zoo stepped down last, much slower than usual. The jokes were gone from him, stripped away somewhere between the gas station and the gate. He looked smaller without them. He turned toward the back of the truck, toward the empty places where Sarah and Danny should have been, arguing, reloading, laughing, breathing. His mouth opened once, but nothing useful came out. "I was right there," he said finally. "I was right there, and I still couldn't—" Fred cut him off, not harshly, but before the guilt could eat him alive. "None of us could." Zoo nodded like he understood, but his eyes said he did not believe it. Not yet. Jake finally let go of the wheel. His fingers came away stiff, cramped into the shape of panic he had refused to show while driving. When he stepped out, a Fairview officer started asking for names, ranks, infection status, exposure details, anything that could fit into a report. Jake heard the questions, but all he could see was the grenade leaving the launcher, the Alpha moving, the pump exploding instead. He had wanted to kill the thing. He had wanted that one shot to balance the universe. Instead, he had bought an escape route and nothing more. "Captain?" the officer asked again. Jake blinked hard and looked at the gate. "2KIA, he said. His voice came out flat. "Corporal Sarah Chin, First Lieutenant Danny Johnson. Alpha class hostile confirmed. It controlled the herd. It killed them." He swallowed, and the rest of the sentence scraped out of him. "We left them there." The words settled over the courtyard harder than the gunfire. Sarah Chin and Danny Johnson became names in the air, and for Team Zulu, saying them made the loss real in a way the blood and fire had not. A medic guided them toward decontamination, but none of them looked relieved to be safe. Safety felt insulting. It felt too clean for what had just happened. Behind the sealed gate, the horde screamed and clawed at the fence. Inside the walls, Team Zulu stood alive, filthy, armed, and broken, in ways no doctor at Fairview could stitch closed. They had reached the outpost, but some part of them was still back at the gas station, trapped in the moment when the team had been 6 and the world had taken 2. Team Zulu spent the rest of that day inside Fairview Medical, doing the things survival had barely allowed them to remember, scrubbing blood and smoke from their skin, swallowing hot chow that tasted too real, and sitting under clean fluorescent lights that made the silence feel wrong. No one said Sarah's name for hours. No one said Danny's either. Their absence sat at the table with the remaining 4, heavier than rifles, heavier than grief, and no locked gate or armed wall could keep it out. By the next morning, Fairview security escorted them into a briefing room buried deep inside the annex. The door sealed behind them with a hard metallic thud. The lights dimmed. A wall of screens flickered to life, each one showing satellite images, blood samples, quarantine maps, and bodies covered by white sheets. Dr. Helen Reeves stood in front of it all, pale and rigid, like she had rehearsed this speech 100 times and still dreaded saying it aloud. "Do you remember the meteor shower 2 months ago?" she asked. No one answered. Reeves looked from Fred to Jake to Akira to Zoo, and then touched the screen. The image changed to a streak of fire tearing through the night sky. "Most of it burned up in the atmosphere," she said, her voice quiet. "Not all of it." A second image appeared, black fragments sealed in glass, marked with biohazard warnings. Several meteor fragments carried an extraterrestrial bacterium. One of them came into contact with a civilian already infected with COVID-19 and suffering from late-stage cancer. At first, nothing happened. No fever, no violence, no warning. She paused, and in that pause, the room seemed to shrink around them. Then he got sick. He became patient zero. Reeves tapped the display again, and a branching chain of mutations spread across the screen like cracks in ice. The bacterium did not simply infect him, she said. It studied what was already inside him. It rewrote the virus. It hijacked the cancer cells. It turned his own body into a laboratory, then into a weapon. Zoo's usual smirk vanished. Akira's hand tightened around the edge of the table until her knuckles went white. Reeves continued, each word colder than the last. What came out of him was more aggressive than anything we had ever recorded. It made Ebola look like it had gone on summer vacation. The screen shifted again, showing a pulsing red model of the new strain. And then it mutated again, Reeves whispered. A super coronavirus adaptive predatory, capable of changing faster than we can study it. For a moment, only the soft hum of the screens filled the room. Then one monitor blinked from green to red, another followed, then another. The warning tone rose from a single pulse into a shrieking alarm as every quarantine map on the wall bled crimson at once. Reeves turned slowly toward the display, and the last color drained from her face. A live camera feed appeared on the center screen, the outer fence of Fairview Medical buckling outward beneath hundreds of pounding hands. Behind the horde, taller shadows moved through the smoke. Not one alpha, several. Fred rose from his chair without being told. Jake's hand went to the sidearm on his hip. Akira whispered something that might have been a curse. Zoo stopped breathing. On the screen, the first section of fence tore loose with a scream of metal. Reeves backed away from the table, her voice barely more than a whisper. They followed you.